All right. What's up, everybody? It's been a little bit here since we've done one of these. It's been, I think, let me see. Let me look it up. How long has it been? August 5th, House of the Dragon. That's when we concluded our House of the Dragon coverage. So it's been about 19 days if you've been counting the days, minutes, and hours, like I have, of course. House of the Dragon was kind of like the last big show on the radar. I was personally looking forward to this one as it's something that I've been kind of a outspoken, quiet fan of. That doesn't even make sense, but it's a show that I feel like I've personally never met somebody in person who watches Pachinko, and it's low key one of my favorite shows on Apple TV. So for those of you in the reviews complaining about doing an Apple TV series again, here we are. We're doing it. It's been a great morning, except for Manchester United losing to Brighton today. Fall season is in place. All the pumpkin stuff is out at Starbucks. Your pumpkin cream cold brews, your pumpkin spice lattes. And another P started yesterday, Pachinko. So we're back. We're back with the historical drama, one of Apple's low-key gems that, although the second season just premiered last night, is somewhere on the, it's like a number 6 on the top 10 chart. So I don't think this is a show for everybody. It's meat and potato, as I've said on this program before. Meat and potato is a term for the drama shows, the ones that don't have the cheap thrills, the shows that are about character journeys, character arcs, character development, and just incredible acting, incredible script writing, everything, you know? So it's the type of show that one would be proud to make, right? So I've been looking forward to it, and there's just been so much good material out there for the last couple of years that it's been in the background of things that I've wanted to discuss. And so we'll see how I do this. It's going to be a solo pod for this one. I don't intend to do this as a duo discussion. I do intend to kind of just talk about these episode to episode and just the themes being told in the story as a generational drama and whatnot. So it'll be a little bit less prepared in terms of like I'll be scrolling IMDb because God help me with these Korean names here. Korean and Japanese names. I'm sure to butcher a ton of them. But yeah, let's get into it, shall we? A little bit of housekeeping before we do. Kind of just took a little bit of a break after House of the Dragon. So work has been slammingly busy and a couple of interesting opportunities have emerged along the way. So that is the explanation as to why there hasn't been content out there. So let's get into this. Pachinko, you know it's good when Apple TV does not give you 2 episodes on a season premiere. So let us get into it. We are beginning with season 2, episode 1, and let's kind of briefly recap the things that took place in season 1. You know, we're introduced to Sunja, and by the way, like I said, I'm going to butcher some of these names, the pronunciation, whatever. But we get this multi-generational story of Sunja and her family, who is essentially growing up born in Korea, South Korea. And it's a period of time where Japan annexes South Korea. And so we're seeing this immigrant story of a Korean family adjusting to life in Japan, trying to make a name for themselves, trying to not even necessarily make a name for themselves, because I think you see different figures in the family with different motives, right? And the generations kind of discuss that. And one of the reasons I love this show so much is because it personally resonates with me. I'm not Korean. I know my looks may fool you, but I'm Cuban American, and my family came from Cuba. My family comes from a dictatorial regime where all of their property was seized, everything was taken from them, And so they had to adapt to the way of life in America, and live pretty much the American dream, the immigrant's journey, right? And so each generation kind of has its burden to bear, of what is the burden to them. And so our main character in this series, Sunja, who is a woman born in Korea during this time where Japan is annexing South Korea, like I already mentioned. She comes across a sort of mysterious mafioso figure, maybe connected to Yakuza, named Hansu, who's played by Lee Min-ho. And he's this wealthy figure who falls in love with this peasant Korean girl, right? And he impregnates her, but only after he impregnates her, he lets her know that he's already married in Osaka to another woman for business purposes. It's sort of like a business marriage, so to speak. Who knows? I'm sure we'll get more information on that as we go. But he's married, has 3 daughters, and so he promises to take care of Sunja, but he cannot marry her. So he's going to provide for her financially, all that stuff, but she does reject that. And she gets married to a man who's recovering. He's kind of sickly, has tuberculosis. His name is Isaac, and he is a Christian who's visiting Korea and goes to Sunja's house, and they nurse him back to health. He ends up overhearing her situation, which is heartbreaking. And Pachinko is one of those shows where you'll be crying to yourself on the couch alone watching it, kind of thing, because of just you talk about a character who's gone through hardship after hardship after hardship. It's definitely Sunja's character. And it continues in season 2, as we'll talk about with this episode. Make sure I'm recording here. Oh, thank God I'm recording. I thought I did not hit record, ladies and gents. It's been a while. So Isaac marries her in an honorable fashion to cover up her sin of, essentially, in that day, if you had a kid out of wedlock, it was game over on your prospects. And he does the honorable thing of taking her on, more than kind of like a 50-50, right? He's somebody who's sickly, and so it's going to be hard for him to find a wife, and he knows that for her it's pretty much social suicide, in terms of having a bastard child in that day, right? So you have that dynamic where they move to Osaka. Isaac is working as a pastor slash they say communist in one of the recaps I wrote, but I did not gather that from the show. I don't know who wrote that review, but I didn't gather that he was any sort of communist activist. I gathered that he was somebody who was working for raising the wages of the laborers. So whatever political philosophy that would be in that day and age in Japan, around the figure that's 1917-ish, maybe 1920s, post World War One. Whatever philosophy that would have been, he was fighting for the wages at that time. Now, I'm kind of fuzzy on some of the years in this show, but time does pass. Sunja does marry Isaac. She has her son, Noah, who is Hansu's kid, which is the mafioso's kid, secretly. And then she has Mozasu, who is introduced more more in detail in season 2, which is great because his character is like this little cute kid who's the opposite of his brother. He's impulsive. He makes bad decisions. He's not scared of bullies. He commands his classroom. He turns social situations to his favor, and it somewhat explains his behavior as an adult because we see some of the actions that he takes in this episode. I'm like 4 coffees deep today. I just got a coffee maker. Picked up some pumpkin spice ground coffee from Fresh Market. And woke up early to watch the Manchester United game where we got robbed. So, on to this series. Things are getting bad in Japan. We pick up in season 2 with essentially Sunja, whose kids are pretty much starving. In the end of the previous season, she takes initiative upon herself after Isaac gets arrested for political purposes, and she's taken it upon herself to sell kimchi in the local market. Now, in this time in Japan, Koreans are treated as second-class citizens, and it still extends to the 1980s because we do get a vision or a view of 1989 Osaka. Now, I believe there was a financial collapse in Japan around the 80s. I guess I was in, okay. There was a 1990s banking crisis. So I just have a feeling that Japan is heading, like we're heading in this series towards another hardship for Sunja, as if she hasn't had enough. But we do get a vision of like, they lay the groundwork of showing us how Koreans are treated as second-rate citizens in Japan at this time. And no matter what they do, no matter if Sunja's been there longer than most Japanese people in that country, she's still being treated as a second-rate citizen, even towards the end of the premiere of season 2, where she's discriminated against in a bakery, of all things, for her supposed half-assed Japanese. Now, there's a whole host of characters that we're dealing with in present day compared to the past. And I got to say, the directing is just so well done. Who directed episode 1 was Leanne Wellham, which is crazy. She hasn't, at least according to IMDb, she hasn't directed anything since 2022, which was actually Conversations with Friends. And then she did some episodes on His Dark Materials, which I believe is is that an HBO show? It's an HBO show. HBO, yeah. I have those books up there somewhere. I never got around to reading them, though. So we're constantly going back and forth with Sunja and in the past and in the present day. Now, I don't know where her character arc is going in the present day, other than where and how it relates to Solomon, her grandson's character, right? Now, the interesting thing with Sunja is that she has 2 sons, and 2 of them come from 2 different fathers. So you have Noah, who we haven't seen in the present day, and forgive me if I'm blanking if he died or something, but I don't believe we have seen Noah in the present day yet. And then we have Mosasu, who owns a pachinko parlor. Now, Noah is Hansu's kid, and Mosasu is Isaac's kid. And they're kind of polar opposites. You would think Mosasu, being the son of the pastor, that he would be kind of the more moral one in a sense. But no, he ends up being someone, like I said, who's impulsive, owns a pachinko parlor, is in debt up to his ears, and even goes into further debt to try to fund his son's solo venture that we find out about in this episode. In the past tense, we have season 2 opening up in 1945, which is, of course, the latter end of World War II. And sorry, I'm getting distracted here because I have this Dark Materials thing open. It's the latter end of World War II, and you have the threat of bombs being dropped on the city by Americans, right? Because in 1945, that's when America dropped August of 1945 is when they dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is interesting because we do get word that Sunja's brother-in-law works at a munitions factory, I believe, in Nagasaki. So we're going to see how that plays out. And I don't believe I've ever seen a show or a film that covers this topic, that covers life in Japan. Because, as you know, present day, Japan is one of our largest allies in the U.S. But nonetheless, the U.S. is the only country to ever drop an atomic bomb on somebody. And you see in this episode, they do drop pamphlets of warnings to the people, telling them essentially to petition their emperor to lay down his arms, right? So they're trying to lay warnings down so that they don't have to drop the bombs. Now, I know it is disputed whether we had to do it or not. That is not really something I'm prepared to discuss at all, but I don't think it takes away from the interest of seeing this period of time from 1945 to 1989 and seeing what transpires. You have Hansu's character who's overlooking Sunja and her children's life. Particularly, he's interested in Noah because that's his son. And he doesn't have a son through his actual wife. He has 3 daughters. And what he's really interested in is kind of, I think, cultivating his heir into the man he wants him to become, while also has this weird, not weird necessarily, because you can totally understand why he's territorial over Sunja, right? He's married to the other woman, but he's actually in love with Sunja, but he values his power and his status more than he does honor and the integrity of essentially treating her correctly. And as a gentleman. But he does what he can do in order to kind of like keep a watchful eye over her by pulling the strings of both, looking over her sons, getting them into proper schools, learning the secrets of people in the neighborhood, and just kind of keeping tabs on everybody. As you see Mr. Kim in this episode, he's essentially commissioned by Hansu to look over Sunja and her family. But she's in dire straits at this point. She gets into selling rice wine, essentially being pleaded by a neighbor of hers who is getting beaten by her husband. And so she starts pretty much bootlegging and trying to sell black market rice wine. But because it's Sunja, of course, she gets caught by the police on the first day, which you kind of have to wonder if Hansu didn't set that up himself there, because I'm sure he doesn't want her involved in any of that, considering he's rich as hell. So I'm going to guess that he was the one who gave the tip on that for whatever reason. But he does act like somebody who knows everything, right? Like he has this talking down to her moment at the end of the episode where he pleads her to leave the city and go into the countryside. Why? Because the logical conclusion would be like, if you're viewing America as an enemy, right? Then these people are thinking at the time that America's going to drop the bomb on Osaka or one of the other more populated cities in Japan. They're not going to drop it in the countryside, which is where Nagasaki and Hiroshima are, I believe. So the natural thinking was that they're going to carpet bomb a populated city. Maybe because that's something they would have done, right? I mean, Pearl Harbor and what have you. So the opposite occurs, of course, and I'm wondering to see what the fallout's going to be from that. I'm wondering to see if this is how Noah dies, possibly. Maybe Hansu thinks that he knows what's best for his son, and maybe he kidnaps him and takes him to the countryside. Who knows what's going to happen in this episode, but he does kind of have this God complex where he thinks that he knows reality, that Sunja doesn't know reality. And I think we're going to find out that all of these powerful men that think that they're in charge, or powerful people who think that they're in charge with all their wealth and their earthly possessions, that they're only as powerful as their wealth can stretch, right? And I think we're going to have sort of like this humbling moment for Hansu. And I haven't read the books. I haven't read Pachinko. I would love to read the book. This is definitely up my alley, but I have not. Now, modern day. We're going to talk about Solomon Beck's character, who is Sunja's grandson by way of Mozasu. So he is the son of the Pachinko parlor owner. He grew up in banking. He went to Yale. I don't know what strings were pulled because we haven't met Hansu yet in present day. I don't believe, because it's been a while. I watched a couple of recaps on YouTube, and I don't recall a scene where we're formally introduced to his character. Now, with that being said, Solomon is let go by his company because he has this moral moment where he stands up for this Korean woman who refuses to sell her property to this hotel developer in the previous season. And so he pretty much counsels her the way he would counsel his grandmother in that situation. But it's not black and white yet, right? Because Solomon, although he stands up for his Korean heritage, he's constantly kind of wavering back and forth between this desire for status and to fit in, and for standing up for his roots. And we don't quite know which direction he's going to go. He's kind of told his grandmother off in a few different moments, which as the viewer, you're thinking like, I want to slap this guy upside the head for the hell that his grandmother has gone through to support their family. But and I want to talk more about that. I want to kind of veer off of the plot for a second. I think like the beautiful thing about this series is that Sunja comes from poverty. She comes from political persecution. She comes from government persecution. She comes from racial persecution, right? She has taken the full brunt of it. She's raised two sons on her own practically. She was not taken advantage of, but fell in love with a man that she could not be with, right? Then she has to go to a country that she doesn't belong to, that she doesn't fit into. Then she has to pretty much scrape through poverty while raising two sons, selling kimchi in the market, selling illegal rice wine in the market, surviving post-World War II Japan, right? All of these conditions, all of these hardships. And in order so that you can have a character like Solomon to have this conundrum, right? Because everything for Solomon at this moment, I think in his character arc, speaks to any of you out there, speaks to myself, people who have had grandparents who sacrificed everything for their grandkids, grandparents who don't necessarily boo-hoo and share all of their hardships with their family, right? The people who have gone through the most, especially that older generation, they tend to take their lumps. They tend to stay reserved. They don't, nowadays we're kind of like in this therapist society, right? Where everybody's going to get help and talk to somebody. But this generation very much carried their crosses, so to speak, right? And Sunja's no exception to this. And I think any of you out there who had a mother, a father, a grandparent who sacrificed something major, who grew up in whatever country, it doesn't have to be where I'm from, doesn't have to be Korea, but I think anybody can relate to this story of knowing who that person is in your family. And God only knows what they went through, right? And they don't say it. They don't kind of put you in your place when you're having your bratty first world moment. And that's kind of where Solomon is here, right? He's a guy who feels, I think he feels in some sense an honorable pressure to want to do right by his family, to want to advance his family in a way because of the sacrifices they have made to give him a better life, to let him go to Yale, to let him have a career in banking and whatever he's doing. And yet it's a selfish desire at the same time. We get like kind of this unnerved guy, this guy who's still seeking for identity in himself, seeking identity through career success. And we don't quite know which direction he's going to go in and whether it's going to end in an honorable way or not. But we do see him have an honorable moment when he tells the old lady not to sell. But then he comes back and essentially pressures her to sell after the fact. So who is he? Which side is he going to go? Is he going to go to the light side or the dark side, right? And I think that's going to determine where this series goes. I think while the past is unraveling and we're seeing it all kind of lead to this place, right? Solomon's going to dictate the terms of where the story goes to from here. And it'll be interesting to see if he takes a selfish approach or a family-oriented approach, right? Because it's interesting, right? These are families that come from poverty. These are families that are scraping. They're middle class. The father has a business, but he's up to his ears in debt. And yet he still believes in his son to such a degree that he's willing to take on more debt. And I know there was a major financial collapse in Japan, I think in the 90s, of a banking, like the bubble popped over there essentially. And I do wonder how that's going to come into fruition, because you have a couple of kind of key things occurring, right? You have in 1945, you're waiting, just as the audience member, you're knowing that these atomic bombs are going to drop and World War II is going to end. And Japan is going to usher into a free market society over the decades that follow, right? Because at a certain point, I think in the 80s, the Japanese yen, or whatever the currency is called, was the strongest currency in the world, I believe. I don't know if I'm making that up, but I'm almost positive that was the case. And I would love to interview the author of this series, like the author of the book, and to understand their journey and understand the heart behind the novel and the stories being told. But maybe that can happen someday. Solomon's character is in the middle of this. He's launching his own investment kind of firm, and he's trying to raise 500 million yen, which I believe will be somewhere around $5 million or something like that, because his family offers him 100 million, which is $700,000, right? And then his friend offers him 200 million, which would have been 1.4 million. So if he wanted 200 million more, I'm assuming it's somewhere 5 million and under that he wanted to essentially manage. But he turns down his family's money, and unfortunately, he started counting chickens before they hatched, and his friend reneged on him. So we're leading into episode 2, or chapter 10, I guess, with him going to meet with Abe, who's just won Japanese Businessman of the Year. So I do wonder where this is going to head, because he's not Noah's son. He's Mosasu's son. So I'm wondering if he's going to get in cahoots with Hansu's side of the family, because we know he's going to be involved somewhere along the line here. We just don't know how. Other things going on. I believe the father, who's just opening his pachinko parlor in this episode, which, by the way, let's talk about this. The intro to the series itself, the actual kind of wild dancing that's going on in the parlor, where you have the good guys and the villains even just dancing in this pachinko parlor, is is one of my favorite intros. It kind of reminds me of an anime intro, where sometimes you'll have the literal villains of a series dancing on the outro of a series, which does remind me of that a little bit, but I love it. It's so completely the opposite note of what the series is. And I do kind of hope that while Sunja's whole journey has been this sort of very difficult, hard-fought series of hardships, I do hope that there's some sort of positive, optimistic note at some point in this series. Solomon is somebody seeking fulfillment. You know, he fell in love with his father's girlfriend's daughter, who dies of AIDS or HIV. I don't remember what she had, but she dies in the hospital in the previous season. And so you got Solomon, who's just kind of looking for meaning here. And I'm wondering if he does go into the underworld, essentially, and goes into that dark side, because we do end this episode with him telling his grandmother. He has this, probably the most important scene in this episode, is that he has an outburst in the supermarket. And the outburst essentially was that the baker was discriminating against his grandmother for being Korean. And so he has an outburst where he essentially puts the baker in his place and tells him, just gets fed up for being treated like a second-rate citizen, which anybody could understand, right? Especially if you're contributing to society the way these people have, and it's like of no fault of their own that they're in this country. Because last season, even, you see Sunja go to her country of origin. I think she goes back to Busan in South Korea to go see her father's grave, which has been replaced by a parking lot. Okay. And she finds out, kind of like the whole bit that occurs there, is that she's now a stranger in her own home country at this point. She's a stranger in her home country, and she's a stranger in her new country, Japan. And I think that's where a lot of people find themselves, is people who have been uprooted from their homelands, go to another country, and by the time they return back to their homeland, they no longer fit in to that society anymore. And so you kind of have like this sort of, not lost generation, but like a displaced generation that is never quite welcomed, no matter where they are. At least that they won't feel it inside, right? So Solomon has that sort of pressure of succeeding where no one else in his family has up to this point. Yeah. Where the series goes from here, no idea. It's not the type that is like a thrilling series. It's not the type that is for everybody. It is very much, if you're looking for a character journey, if you're looking to feel all sorts of emotions while watching this show. And it's very much a historical drama. I do wonder what the ratings are on a series like this, and what dictates. I mean, it's getting fantastic reviews. Just so you guys know, it has like a 9.2 out of 10 on IMDb at the moment, which I discount that half the time, because Rotten Tomatoes feels like sort of bought and paid for. Half the time you'll have the audience rating be higher than the critics rating. So there's like a grain of salt to take with all of that. One of the aspects I really love about this series is the dual subtitles. You got actually 3 languages going on. You have Korean in yellow, you have Japanese in blue, and you have English occasionally. And so it's kind of like there's no show quite like it that's doing that sort of thing. And I think that's what Apple strives to do, right? They strive to kind of push the boundaries on storytelling. And I've said it over and over again. The floodgate has opened to foreign language programming in America. And you have a show like this that I think is one of Apple's most well-made series on their entire streaming platform. And it largely goes, I think, unnoticed, because a show like this should, in my opinion, is worthy of a top 1, 2, 3 position, but it's number 6. You got to scroll to find it. So I'm glad they renewed it, and I hope they do it justice and take it through completion, to the end of the series. But it's a different series to kind of talk about. It's more, I think it's heavier discussion, but I think it's an introspective discussion that you can have about this one, because I think a lot of us, I know speaking for myself, are like Solomon, right? Where it's kind of, you put his sort of burden and you put his sort of conflicts in perspective against his grandmother's, and they pale in comparison. And yet he thinks it's sort of the end of the world, that his career is not going quite up. It's not quite up to snuff for his standards, right? Because he wants to be like Hansu. He wants to be this kind of culturally elite guy with wealth and career success and all this stuff. And you have his grandmother who's just approaching life from a completely different perspective. And I do hope that their character arcs kind of collide on that journey, so that he can sort of put that ambition into its proper place, and realize that he ain't got shit on his grandmother's hardships, because what she's been through, she put the whole family on her back pretty much, and doesn't have that sort of dramatic moment at the end of the episode where Solomon is confronting her, ripping up the check in front of her face and saying that he can't do it anymore. It's too hard. I can't do this for you anymore, Grandma. I can't keep feeling bad for you. If only he could watch, as the audience does, of her past and what she goes through. I think it makes everybody watching the show want to call their grandma, want to call their grandpa. If you don't come from like a wealthy background, or if you're not like in a multi-generational situation in the country you're in, but if you come from a family that your parents or your grandparents went through hell to put the shirt on your back, then this show is the type that puts you in that sort of frame of mind to appreciate that, and to appreciate the beauty of seeing a family sort of rise from the ashes. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how everything develops, how everyone is impacted by the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It seems like we're going to sort of get the Nagasaki perspective, because we have direct characters that are actually in that area. So unfortunately, it seems like Sunja's heading for more hardship, and I don't think it's going to get any easier, because she's in the thick of it. So where and how Hansu is impacted by all of this, we'll see. I do wonder if the series is eventually going to sort of put the past on a back, put the past in the past. I think I'm just wondering if they're going to just focus more on the present day, or the 1980s would be the present day for the series. But we shall see. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of season 2. Let me know if you even watched Pachinko. It's a show that I stumbled on when season 1 was already complete, and I just binged it in a week pretty much. Like I said, it's heady. It's not the type that you can kind of multitask while watching, but it is the type of show that fits in that category of, I think you're a better person after you're done watching it. And I don't say that lightly, but I do think it's that type of show. And I think it's the type of show that the writers, the directors, the staff, the crew, the actors, everybody, it's the type of show that you're really proud of, right? And it's just so well directed. There's a scene where Sunja, the older version of herself, is in the Pachinko parlor as the grand opening is happening, and you see this sort of lost look in her eyes, and her eyes looking forward, but she's actually looking in the past, and she's looking back at the time where she was scraping for nothing, where there was maggots in the ration rice, and she was bootlegging rice wine with her neighbor. And she's kind of thinking back to those days. I'm really interested to see what's going on. And it's kind of the torture of these Apple TV series that they release it weekly when you really like the show. So props, kudos. Premiere was great. Picks up right where we left off, and I'm looking forward to more. Looking forward to seeing if Isaac survived in the prison, if anybody's going to be impacted by the atomic bombs in this direct family, if we're going to learn more about Sunja's journey from 1945 onward, all those things, and where our natural conclusion is heading. Where is that going to be? What path will Solomon take? Will he stay true to his family, or will he go the selfish route? So, thanks for tuning in, y'all. It was good to do this again. I feel like I'm dusting off the cobwebs. I'm sure it feels like it in the audience if you're out there. Always remember, review, like the show. You can now comment on Spotify. You can visit our website, soapbox.house, although there's not much to do on there. But it is the kind of like the hub where you can find everything of ours if you want to listen on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube. We are at 500 and something subs. I'd love to see the channel go over 1,000 subs soon, and we have enough people to do it. So I know this series isn't for everybody, except for maybe the Story Archives diehards out there. But welcome you back to the show, and I'd like to do this week to week. If not week to week, then maybe I watch a couple more episodes and then do another episode. But either way, you can look forward to more Pachinko coverage here. And if you have any other TV series you'd like to recommend, you can email them at contact@soapbox.house. Or if you just want to chat, email at contact@soapbox.house. And for all of you who have reached out via email, thank you for doing so. I got to get around to replying to them. Thanks again. Have a great weekend, everybody. Peace. Love y'all.